Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is Pastor Megan, and I am with Grace Lutheran in San Francisco. And today we're having an intersectional conversation with Just Lutheran, which is about just listening to issues that are intersectional and trying to be the best we can. And today I have with me you want me to introduce yourself? Yeah!
Well, hello, Reverend Dr. Megan. So happy to be here with you today.
It's so lovely to see you. Would you be willing to share some of the intersections that you embody with those who are listening?
Absolutely. Intersections is a good word to describe me. So I'm Tony Scott. I am a faith-based communications expert out of Hollywood. I work with a lot of major studios to help them reach a faith-based audience with their films. Some of my film work has included Heaven is for Real and Unbroken, among a few others. But beyond that, I also have a heart for ministry. So I've worked in ministry. Actually, I've been in ministry for pretty much all of my life. I've had the distinct honor of being in leadership in the world's largest gay and lesbian church out of Dallas, Texas. And from that moment, had a interesting transition to one of the largest evangelical churches in the nation. We're talking a church with 40,000 members and being in leadership there. So coming from two different extremes and learning a whole lot in the middle. And I just so happen to be gay. So thought I'd throw that into the mix, which makes for an interesting mix for ministry, but learned so much through that and just feels like it's kind of been my calling to make the gospel available to everybody. And recently, I'm in the process of launching a new community called Grace for Gays. So I think the word grace just gets lost in the conversation when it comes to having a relationship with Christ. And because of all that we're seeing in the world of social justice, and I've always been a guy that's been on the sidelines with that, I just launched the Racial Equity Forum, a 501c3 nonprofit. And thank you. She's got that on the screen, Racial Equity Forum, because I felt it was time to have a voice in the whole conversation about racial equity and social justice. So decided to just put my hat on and just go for all of it, and transitioning out of my business to do more of these works geared toward the community. So that's just a little bit about me.
What kind of stuff will people find on the Racial Equity Forum? Because we've been trying to have a lot more kind of intersectional listening conversations, and I know in particular the Lutheran Church, unfortunately being the whitest of all the denominations in the United States, we can use more racial equity, but what kind of stuff will they find there?
Absolutely. One of our missions with the Racial Equity Forum is to really bring all groups together, Black, white, BIPOC, just everybody together. There are things that we need to talk about. Mm-hmm. And I believe a lot of progress hasn't been made over the years because we just don't want to talk about certain things. So this is a place where we should feel comfortable feeling uncomfortable and talking. And so we're basically going to be events. And we had our first Racial Equity Forum back in September last year. And we had people like Robin DiAngelo. She's the author of Ambiguity. But we also had one of the young men who was one of the Central Park Five, who has actually, we call him the Exonerated Five now. And that was just made for a great conversation and topics from a whole diverse spectrum. So we're not only just focused on race, we want to talk about economics. We're probably going to talk about housing. We'll talk about, racial equity, even in the LGBTQ community. There's a lot of work to be done there as well. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm grateful that you're doing that work. Is the forum a place that people can participate in conversations regardless of what their own kind of racial background is as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, because we tell people to bring your questions, bring your curiosity, even bring your pain. and we will get together and not only just talk about it, because, there's a lot of talking going on all over the world, but let's see what solutions we can come up with. So our goal is to have people leave a forum with some action steps, even on a personal level, that they can take to help the world be a more racially equitable place.
Do you have any, I'm putting you on the spot to ask this, but I just thought I might as well. Do you have any advice for the whitest denomination in the country in terms of ways that we should be striving forward?
Absolutely. I think one, just being open and willing to listen. And listening is going to come with the ability to be able to invite others who don't look like you, who may not worship like you, who may not even believe like you. So it's going to take that invitation first to create a space where some listening can take place. And one of the things I try to advise too, when it comes to, maybe groups who don't have a whole lot of experience dealing with racism or racial equity, it's not something that you need to force too, it's just get to be organic. But if we can recognize our common humanity, we can make a whole lot of progress, and just ask questions. I'm of the belief that I'm not an African-American person who wears a chip on my shoulder. Not to say that my community does, but it's I'm not going to bite somebody's head off if they ask a question that may seem crazy, inappropriate, because sometimes people just don't know things. You don't know what you don't know. So,
well, as somebody in a conversation with you who will ask you questions during this public time together, I'm grateful for that for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder, would you be willing to talk about maybe some of the ways that your intersections have shaped your faith? Because you have such a great kaleidoscope of worlds that you have kind of put your tiptoe in, and in some places your full professional self enough to get an Emmy. And are there ways in which you think some of those intersections have inspired your faith or shifted your faith?
Absolutely. I believe that the root for a lot of the intersections that I move in is probably a result of, my hunger and search to sort out what my faith is and what my beliefs are. Because I'm of the belief that everybody has to start someplace. So I would dabble in this and dabble in that and dabble there, to really get to a place where it all starts to make sense and connect. So, yeah, I believe let's take my film work, for instance. It's that the reality is, because I'm a marketing guy from the standpoint too, that I love to look at data and strategy and statistics. But even from a marketing standpoint, when I look at church today, the reality is there are just hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even millions, who will absolutely never set foot in a church. No matter we try to drag them there, no matter what we do, there's just some people who will not set foot in a church. So I look at the big screen as just a whole new marketplace or a whole new way to get the message out to people in a way that's very palatable, where they can still feel what we want them to feel, or kind of question the things we want them to question, or have curiosity, about what they believe. And I think that's the greatest mission field at all. I think that's the current mission field that's the greatest, because church as a building, it's been around forever, but a lot of times the church is just our friends, it's our family. Every once in a while we may get a new visitor come in, but the reality is there's just some who will never set foot in church. So what about those people? What about God's promises for them? What about the grace that's available to them? How are they going to get it? And I could have sworn that Jesus said, go out into all the world, not into all the churches, but out into all the. See, I'm about to start preaching. See, I'm going to behave, Megan. We get to go out into all the world, and particularly in the church history that I have, coming from Pentecostal evangelical, the world has always seemed as a bad place, but that's where the people are. So we have to go out into all the world if we're going to reach people. So that's where that intersection comes from.
Yeah. How did you grow into that insight? Because I get a lot of I get a lot of comments from people, particularly folk who saw me on Queer Eye and might live in the South or might live in Brazil, in places that have a very whose theology of their place might be you either love God in this way or you don't love God at all. And so how did you kind of grow into the spirit of being able to see that God exists in the world just as much as God exists in one particular church building or in one particular charism of how the Spirit is present in the world?
I think that's just an awesome question. And I can point to two things. Is that one, I guess I was always a curious child. It's like I'm that stereotypical child you would see on TV, but why? But why? But why? But why? It's like, because it's like if it doesn't register in my head, it's like my head is trying to process this. So I'm like, it's like a cry for more information to understand so I can process this. So that's pretty much the space that I come from. But the other piece to that is, as I guess I've always pictured a relationship with God as a personal thing. You know, I never felt like my pastor could give it to me or my mother could give it to me. But it was a personal thing. And I look at all the years of reading the Bible, and I guess I just felt weird, not in a bad way, but weird in a good ways. Because, okay, I'm reading this, but I'm not seeing people do this. Or this, I'm reading this passage about love, but man, the people are so mean here at church. Things were just not adding up. And that's where that comes from. It's like things did not add up. And that would just push me to study further. And that's like, I hope I'm not becoming anti-church or anti-religion, Lord, but this is just not adding up for me, you know, and that curiosity is what drives that.
Do you have any advice for how people can have kind of those difficult conversations that happen when people have translated love differently? But what I mean by that is, particularly in Pentecostal tradition and evangelical tradition, and please let me know if I'm incorrect about this, but my experience has been that there is a definition of love that kind of comes from this Pauline idea that to let someone know that they're not doing what's right, no matter what kind of way you tell them or no matter what withdrawal you have from them, that is an expression of love, to tell people every thought you have about them, if you think they're not good, for an identity reason or because of a way that they're living in the world. And I see that as like a difference in what love is. Some people think love is to be what other people think is abusive or unkind or tough love. And do you have any advice about ways that we can talk to other Christians with kindness when we have such really different ideas of what love is, or if someone else's Christian idea of love feels like it's abusive to us, how we can like still be kin with each other and have conversations, but maybe not be okay with being abused in a part of that? I don't know. I'm just, you're closer to the Pentecostal world than I am. And so I'm just curious to hear if you have any thoughts about that.
Oh man, it's like my new addiction, for lack of a better word, or my new indulgence is this new audio chat app called Clubhouse. And on Clubhouse, every Sunday at 5:55 p.m. Central Time, I host a room. And the first time I did it, hundreds of people came because I had the question, gay and Christian, with the question mark. And my God, the room got filled with a lot of people who didn't believe the two can coexist. But after just talking it through, it's like people started to see the light. It's like, I always, one of my favorite sermons I preach is a sermon called Acceptance versus Approval. You have the right to not approve of anything about me. I cannot take that away from you. But there are some things in this world that you have to accept because it's beyond your power or ability to do anything about it. It just is. And in talking in that room, you know, people were just so obsessed with, you know, well, I mean, you say you're minister, but what about your sin? What about your sin? And it's like, first of all, that is a finished work. And secondly, it's like God's love is unconditional. And, I see that there's a tendency to try to put conditions, God will love you if you do X, 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 X. But in reality, that's not what the Gospels that I read say. And yeah, I know that some people feel like they have been indoctrinated to be the sin police, but I don't see where that exists in the Bible. Secondly, I love even when we take on the whole issue of, addressing people's sin. You take a look at John when he said, little children, I tell you to sin not, and people take that as an admonishment. But if you would just go to that next verse, you get some understanding. But then he said, but when you sin, it's like, now look, are we not going to sin or are we going to sin? But he said, but when you sin, remember that you have an advocate. And that's always my advice to people who are on the other side of a lot of the abuse and hatred that comes from that. Your relationship with God is between you and God. It's not subject to someone else's approval or understanding. And even when they get when they get in that space where they really want to fight and, take you on, it's like sometimes you just have to remind them about love. Just have to remind them about the love piece of that. And that's like one of the things that's hard for any Christian to get around, especially when you remind them that Jesus said and he said 2 commandments that we have from Jesus. It's like love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And he said, and that if you can do those 2 things, you have fulfilled all the legal law requirements or anything else that they throw at you. So I like to keep it simple.
Yeah, I like that. There's a section of Paul that I've been pondering lately that's about where Paul is talking about the way evangelism should work. And this isn't the kind of evangelism that's more in the marketing space, but I'd love to talk to you about that in a bit. But Paul's saying, like, when you're going to go evangelize to people, when you're going to go and care for people, you should like join them in who they are first, right? So to the Jews, I became the Jews, and like I've just been really pondering and curious about like what that means nowadays. Like, would that mean that people wouldn't be allowed to say like it's not okay to be trans unless they tried it first? Right, all the way tried it first, right? That'd be, I mean, the problem is then people might just say, oh yeah, but you can change back. So there's all these dangers in trying to replicate something else that is happening completely. But I've just been trying to think about like, what is the modern day equivalent of trying to evangelize by joining people? And I feel like so much of the work that you've done in a lot of different kind of professional realms has been about joining people. And what was it like to switch from the most popular gay church to the mega church? Like what was because it had to have been different, yes?
Yeah, it was definitely culture shock, indeed, culture shock. And it's like going from one extreme to the other. And I also believe it was probably one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, because I was very, confident in my relationship with God, and I, knew so much. We were just rolling, we boys, and we good, and we're buddies, and things were good. But being in an evangelical church kind of gave me the opportunity to see the other side and why they're so passionate about what they believe, and that, oh wow, these aren't homophobic monsters like I thought. There's just sometimes people who just don't know better. They don't know better. They have interpreted the scriptures the best way they can, and in many cases they don't know better. They deal with the same problems and issues. And I told you like how my mind works. It's like people want to judge me for saying, that quote unquote I'm gay, and they just presume I'm having sexual relations. But so-and-so over there is not married and he's living with his girlfriend and they're having sex. So why is that not upsetting to everybody there? So it's just kind of those intersections of people practicing what they preach. But it put me in a position where I had to totally reevaluate my relationship with God all over again, because it was just such such culture shock. And I had to go into the closet again, not necessarily out of shame or so, but I just felt like it was of necessity to be there to learn. Or if I were to put this in marketing terms, it was just a living focus group to be there, to be silent. And I was there. I was there. I was silent. I wasn't trying to rush into leadership, but I knew the plan, I would have guidance from the Holy Spirit about how this was going to unfold, and you're going to be a leader here. And it's like, well, that really is going to be a move of God if that happens. So, and it just happened to be on the top tier of, executive pastoral leadership, in a mega church. Still, I don't like to say secretly, but still quietly gay, but not ashamed to tell anybody if they, were to ask.
Mm-hmm. Part of the language of the trans community is we talk about being that there's different realms of our life, right? That it's not about like just being out to every person, because I'm not out to the supermarket checkout teller, right? Like that's not ever anyone's reality unless they're super, super famous and people know them before they arrive.
Because don't ask, don't tell. And my philosophy was ask, tell.
Yeah. Well, so we talk about in some parts of your life, you might be lower non-disclosing because that's your work life and it's not about you. It's about caring for other people, and that's okay. And in other parts of your life, like with your romantic partners or with your pastor or with your family, you might be high disclosing because that's their business because you're in life with them. And I feel like that's a better reality for the way, like, there are parts of my life where I'm high disclosing that I'm a pastor, and other, like on an airplane. Have you been on an airplane and people think I'm a pastor yet? Yep. Low disclosing on an airplane, right? Or in places where I'm not sure if I'm going to be safe when I'm traveling. I might be disclosing less about my sexual orientation or my gender identity. Or if my kids are with me, I might disclose less. Than other times.
Parade is saying, I'm a Christian. Oh my, you may not want to disclose that. It brings up emotions and feelings and
right. Or like right in the middle of a Seder might not be the time to disclose how Christian you are, because you're there kind of stepping into other people's shoes and being respectful of community. And so I think, like, I'm appreciative that you have been willing to step into that realm and to do it with an inquisitive listening space, because my hunch is that most of us agree on more than we disagree on. I think
that is so true.
NPR talks about like 98% of our DNA is the same no matter what the rest of our details are, and so there's something really beautiful about when it's safe to do so and it feels authentic to do so, to be low disclosing of your own personal self in some spaces in order to like learn more about the diversity of humanity, and then to use what you've learned to be able to translate, right? Because the Bible had to be translated to us, and maybe gay culture needs to be translated into wider spaces in order for people to get it and to understand what love looks like. And so I appreciate you for being a translator in diverse locations, but also into diverse kind of modalities.
And get this, even with my being, I guess, in the closet, when I worked for this evangelical ministry, what's so interesting is that, one, you have to recognize when God has opened up a door. And sometimes what you do is not as important as who you are entirely, because sometimes evangelicals associate quote unquote homosexuality with what we do without any ability to understand who we are as people. But that church, I can't say that, I would hear the occasional homophobic slur or something. A lot of times that was from, guest pastors, but all that they gave me was love and the word, even the word when I didn't like it sometimes, but then that would be upon me, incumbent on me to go and study deeper to really get an understanding. So it shifted from being closeted out of fear of being put out to being closeted out of appreciation for what I had learned and discovered in that ministry. And from a public relations perspective, when you work with somebody very high profile and you're like in that upper level of leadership with that person in the media, anything that I do is as if that person did it. And let's say that I got drunk in a bar, it would be like so-and-so from so-and-so who works with so-and-so. It would be all about that person who you're serving with. So that was the other piece of why I had to kind of remain silent about my sexuality, but it was out of actually a respect and appreciation for the work that we're doing, because that would distract in a not positive way over something that was not as important as the work of the ministry that was being done. So hope that makes sense.
Yeah, there's kind of a new kind of, well, it's probably an old conversation, but new words to define it that people are talking about. Identity ambiguity, which is like when in one space you might have to be less of something. I'm a chaplain for the police department. And so the correlation there would be if people believe that that someone is less Black because they wear a blue uniform. Do you have experiences where some of those identities might shift a little based on if you're in a community that's more of a Black-centric community, or a queer-centric community, or a Pentecostal-centric community?
Absolutely. It goes back to, you were talking about Paul a few minutes ago, and I love that little particular passage of scripture, and that's when he says, I must become all things to all men so that I may win some to Christ. And that is absolutely true. So there are times when I'm around people who are non-believers that I don't put on, quote unquote, a Christian hat. I'm just a dude. I'm just a human. I'm there to, be with them, to be in fellowship, so to speak. And there are times when I'm in strictly total Caucasian environments. This might not be the time to speak my best Ebonics, like, hey man, what's up, dude? That sometimes you have to have an awareness of where you are and who you're talking to. And if you want to be effective in that setting, you need to sometimes, we call that in the African American community, sometimes you have to code shift, to adapt to the environment you're in to make you more effective in that moment, because effectiveness can be hindered if people try to lock you into stereotypes and expectations, and I'm always been the dude that breaks stereotypes. For instance, some of my best friends, when I was, I recently moved back to Dallas, but when I was in Los Angeles, and I know it ticked off a lot of my Christian friends, but my best friends in Los Angeles were atheists. Like, how can you hang around with an atheist? It's like, because they're people too, and we had so much fun. And what was interesting is they ended up coming to church with me. They said, because we've never met a Christian like you. You're not always just trying to change us. You're not always trying to throw the Bible down our throats. You just treat us like humans, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's one of the number one comments I get from someone who wants to start going to my church is, I've never met anyone who's like you. If there were more people like you, I would go to church. And to be able to say, well, it's online. It doesn't matter where you live. Like, and then to just see how that can change people's hearts and minds, to just have kind of one.
I went over white supremacists. I used to do volunteer work at an elderly home, and I had the most racist white man, and he's like, I'm not gonna even say the words he used toward me, but his favorite word was colored for me. And he just got such an affection for me because I just let it go in one ear and out the other. And if I wouldn't show up, he would ask the nurse, where's that little colored boy? And one day when I told him that my assignment was over, I wasn't going to be able to help him anymore, he's like, well, you know what? I don't like coloreds, but you one of the good ones. To me, that was a compliment, because that's the best he could do based on where he was. And I don't take it the wrong way. So
back when I was in South Dakota, before I had been ordained, the Lutheran Church they had a 20-year period where they forgot that God ordains who God wants to ordain. And so they thought they were in charge, and they made it harder for LGBT folk to become pastors during this 20-year period. And there was a meeting in South Dakota, and I had gone to it, And everybody got up to give speeches about why they thought gay people should be pastors. And they were like, except for Megan. Megan's wonderful. Megan's going to be a great pastor. But all these other people, they're all these things. And like, that's lovely to hear, but it's also like ridiculous, right? Because I'm not, there's terrible people. There's jerks in every church. Yeah. There's jerks in every business. And it's not necessarily identity based, but there's something that is, I think, sets me up personally to have to like work harder and try to like do better. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's why I've accomplished so much, but it also sometimes can be really draining. Do you have a way that you refuel yourself when that pressure of being on or being the one of whatever category someone has picked and put on you? How do you refuel yourself after times like that?
I definitely take Jesus's advice, because Jesus was notorious for just slipping away and just going off to hide somewhere and having some time to himself. So that's one of the ways I refresh myself. It's like I know when I need to walk away from a situation, and I also know when I need some downtime. So, and I know my friends think I'm weird for this, but I love just sitting in my house in absolute silence, sometimes in darkness. And it's like even the silence has a sound when you can just get in that place to just allow yourself to be just totally in a Zen moment, so to speak. And that's kind of how I refuel myself. And also just cranking up some good music and bebopping and dancing around the living room. So that's my other way, because music makes me happy.
I love that. There was a I've recognized that in my own children. I don't know if I have told you this, but I have two Black children who are mine, and we are family with each other. And when we first were in the process of trying to adopt them, the social worker said, "Oh, this is going to be great. You're a pastor. They go to church. Like, they're going to just fit right in. Your congregation's going to be so happy." Well, as I said before, I'm a pastor in one of the whitest denominations in the country, and they have been going to Black church before, which meant that they were used to dancing and singing and drumming. And the current congregation that I was worshiping at found Jesus through silence and through sitting still and through being quiet. And so it's been quite a beautiful spirit-filled disruption to help them come into a new place. And at first, it's kind of like how grown folks sometimes look at young children in a space where they're just like, "You're distracting me." But now, it's been a number of years, and I think people look forward to them dancing and being so happy to be at church. Like, my children love communion so much that every time it's almost communion, they go, "Communion!" And then they help hold up the elements, which is really fun now that church is online, to see a family like love communion so much in a world where so many kids are like, "Get me out of this church as fast as I can." And so there's been kind of this gift of being able to see another person's joy in how they have faith and how they worship. And I love the ways that it's changed. Like, silence means so much more in our worship service now because we get it less because there's children. And we don't have to have silence to think God has shown up, right? We can find God in the other spaces too. And so I love the ways that is able to shift and change in different types of church.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious how people have responded to Grace for Gays, especially because you talked a little bit about being a part of leadership spaces where you weren't as open as you might have been in other times in your life. And so how has it been to be like all in? Like,
it feels good. And I haven't had a whole lot of direct feedback because I think people are maybe afraid to ask questions or say anything at this juncture. But I will say exactly for National Coming Out Day in 2019, in October 2019, although I've been out forever, but that was like uh, my first official public and professional coming out. So I did like this post on Instagram. You know, I was at in Los Angeles. I was at one of the lifeguard shacks that was painted with the rainbow flags and stuff. And it was just like so much shock. Now, most people were very positive and affirming. I had a few told me that, you know, and these were some friends too, told me that I was going to hell, you know, giving myself over to that lifestyle. But then they just unfollowed me, and you go your way, I go my way. So far it's been positive, but even beyond my old community of fellowship, I'm just so overjoyed by people who are so anxious to see it get up and running. Just when I just tell just random strangers about it, it's like, oh my God, that's needed. And, you know, and so many people so excited. So that puts a lot of pressure on me to make sure that it comes out the right way, and to make sure that the message is clear. And even on Clubhouse, because it's like it was a source of controversy this past week on Clubhouse when I announced about Grace for Gays, and it's like they're like, well, why should gays get separate grace from the grace that everybody else gets? It's like, that's what I'm not suggesting. I'm suggesting that gays aren't allowed grace that's a gift from God now, because some of you people keep trying to block them from the grace that has nothing to do with you. So that led us into a very deep conversation that ended very amicably. And that the one guy who was very, I guess, not for it, ended up praying for everybody in the end. It's like, thank you for opening my eyes that, yeah, I shouldn't try to block people, you know, and even I don't like it. And I said, that's fine. You don't have to, you know, but it doesn't have anything to do with you when it comes to a person having a relationship with God. So.
Yeah, and you're up on Instagram now. The website's coming soon, right?
Coming soon at Grace for Gays on Instagram and Facebook. Got a lot of great content, so just ready to roll it out. So the goal was to do it for Valentine's Day, but, you know, because of what's going on here.
Yeah.
Since, you know, Snowmageddon, and so I have to retool, and actually it'll just be ready when it's ready. So
yeah. Well, and for those who don't know, Tony's in a space where Tony's, you're safe now. You have electricity now, but part of this week there was no electricity, no heat too, I'm assuming.
Right. Yeah, I'm in Dallas, Texas. So I had it's been 4 days without electricity. So after day 2, I ended up going to stay with some friends. But I guess when you live in an all electric building, you can't cook, you can't eat, you can't anything, and with ice and stuff everywhere. So it was a crazy time, but it's interesting.
Well, as I said, you're in my prayers. You'll be in my congregation's prayers. Everybody in Texas, we've been praying for, and just hoping that everybody who needs heat and power has it, and even more than just daily bread, has all the nutrients they need during this tough time.
I agree 100%, and joining you in those prayers as well.
Yeah.
Because there are like 14 million people in Texas right now who don't have water.
Wow.
My father being one of them. So we had to get him some cases of water in the interim. So. Yeah.
Well, and obviously for health, because this has just been a really hard time with the coronavirus, with all the racial injustice of our world, with all of the ways that it feels like somebody took the emergency responder preparation guide and just keeps flipping to a new page every couple of weeks, and here's hoping that ceases as soon as it is possible to cease, and that all who are able to have health for as long as possible. And it's a rough time for those who are weary, and a great time for those who are able to translate and code switch grace.
Right.
And get it to people who really kind of deeply need it.
Absolutely.
Is there anything?
It's all in perspective too, because one of the things that I admired most, I know there's not a lot of great things that have come out of the COVID-19 and the pandemic, but one of the things that I admired how it was a situation that this is just me speaking, but I feel like it was a divine opportunity for everybody to take a look at self and look inwardly and make some adjustments as to what you want to do with your life and where you want your life to be.
Yeah, it's been good for my congregation because we were really just using our building for ourselves, and to be able to pledge that we would open more diverse than our building closed. And we've been kind of in shelter in place here in San Francisco for over 11 months ish now, with maybe a month and a half of the last year where in-person worship has been allowed. And so it's been a very reorganizing and stock taking time, and really been about thinking like, okay, once we can leave our houses, once we can be church in a space together, what are the habits that we don't need that we should stop doing before we get back together, and what's the stuff we need to start doing so that we can be more faithful? And I hope we're in a better place in terms of trying to figure out how we can care for each other and love each other. And yeah, that's my fervent prayer anyway. You have had such a ability to be in the world of marketing that one of the things that I know a lot of people are interested in, particularly from kind of a faith perspective, is it's kind of two things. One, how can we better communicate what our church and our faith life is about so that we can kind of market what our faith is to other people? And then I think also, again, from the perspective of being one of the whitest denominations, how can we market it in a way that stops being so much about us and keeps looking like us? Do you have any like thoughts for faithful people who want to try to be better at evangelism in strategic ways?
Sure. That's actually another book that I'm working on too, that talks about how to do evangelism in this modern age. I call it the Jonah syndrome. But I look at Jesus. It's like because I've written a book a few years back for church leadership and pastors that is teaching about faith-based, marketing and communications. And I said that Jesus was the consummate marketer. That look at Jesus's example. It's like he had a sales force. He had ambassadors to go out and tell his message. So that's one way. He also had sampling. Because it's like the word says, taste and see how good the Lord is. Mm-hmm. And also the best way that he marketed himself was word of mouth, and it's still effective. Here we are over 2,000 years later through word of mouth. But the best way that I've learned to evangelize and to share your faith with people is to take a marketing approach. Marketing is always about the message and the benefits. And it's not always about you. It's about what that person needs in that moment. So I take the approach from evangelism that sometimes story is the best way to sell a message. Just like I have seen people led to Christ in my life by sometimes not even mentioning Jesus or even having a Bible. It's just being an example, telling stories, selling the benefits, so to speak, by talking about how they benefited my life, or recognizing something that somebody needs and how I found that through Christ. Mm. So when we make it less about one, I got to win this person to Christ, like it's a lottery and it's a competition and we get to check that person off for our box, that if you can really just get and have an exchange, or we call it in the social media world, have some engagement with the person, and use story, even if it's your own story of, how your faith has helped you, or how your faith got you through a rough time that happens to be the situation that this person is going through. That's how you do that. From a marketing standpoint with your faith.
Well, you remind me of kind of like some of what Martin Luther was up to, and part of why, for me, the Lutheran Church has kind of remained my place of faith. And it's that kind of believed in faith alone, grace alone, and scripture alone. This idea that it's just your faith. No community needs to vote whether or not God loves you. Like, God's going to do what God wants to do, right? It's grace alone because God did all the actions it takes to save you. You don't need to do nothing, and you can't screw it up. God did it so good, even we can't screw it up. I'll speak for myself. Even I can't screw it up, right? And then it's scripture alone because not one, if it turns out on your deathbed, your pastor preached everything wrong, taught you everything wrong, and your buildings were wrong and your organizations were wrong, that your relationship with the Bible and that printed word is enough to make it okay if our faith leaders let us down, that our connection to God is still strong, or if we find a connection to God in the woods rather than in the pews. And for me, that idea that you don't need points aren't going to, you can collect them, but they don't matter.
Right.
And this kind of push that all the time you save worrying about your own soul, you can use to care for everyone else, not because you need them to agree with you or believe the same thing as you, but because you're so thankful that God has done wonderful things for you. So on its best days, that's a really liberative, wonderful thing, because it's kind of this same, I think it's the same nugget that you're up to and your theology is up to and Grace for Gays is up to. On the other hand, what it's meant for Lutherans is that points don't matter, so we don't evangelize, right? We just, we hung out. We had buildings that 100 years ago, they all spoke Finnish or Swedish or whatever that language was. That's how we became the lack of diversity that we are as a denomination, was like, we were okay with just whoever showed up to church being whoever showed up to church. And I'm trying to think about, like, how can we continuously be people who are sharing our good news with other people in ways that it's actually good news for those other people, even if we're in a faith that has kind of let us off the hook, saying we don't have to do it, but that we get to do it. And so we definitely have a lot to relearn about how to evangelize and how to market ourselves. It's a part of what other faiths excel at and other denominations excel at that we have kind of let go because we needed to soak in grace for a little while, I think.
But there is a great opportunity there for the Lutheran Church, because, like I said, definitely the heart is there. I mean, they have loved and embraced you. And also, I think it comes back, we go back to that whole Christian marketing model, that sometimes it's not, the end goal doesn't have to be them coming to your church. The end goal could be, what are you doing in those communities? And for instance, from a like traditional marketing standpoint, African American consumers are very faithful consumers, and they remember people who do things, in the community, and they support those quote unquote businesses. So even if nobody ever comes to your Lutheran church, it's like, what's to stop the church from getting out in the neighborhood and doing some things, or supporting some initiatives, supporting different events, and doing things like that, where you can have a presence, even though their presence may not be among you, but you still have a presence in a greater community. And that would be one of the ways I would approach that.
Well, it's part of why I love that you have kind of a foothold in the film industry, because I think there's something tangible about having a film. Like, there's a complete story that's being told. People can access it in their own time and place. And maybe you get someone to show up at a movie theater, maybe, right? These days, who knows? But so it's not about making someone move to a place, it's about moving them, right?
Right.
And I think there's something that we can learn from filmmaking that can really kind of shape our thoughts about what we think evangelism is and what the heart of being a kind person is. At least that's what I think today. I don't know.
And what you just said was so brilliant. It's like, it's not so much about, like I said, moving. but it's like moving them. And the same thing could be said about the church. It's like, because at the end of the day, you, I, me, we're all bodies, that we are the church, even beyond the building. And if they
Right.
want to come to us, we'll take the church to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's maybe a part of what faithful people are going to have to discern. Like, I think, at least my imagination is that in Texas, people are probably outside in the world more than in San Francisco. But as we kind of have been inside sheltering for a long time, there becomes this, like, many folk have evolved to be able to do online worship. They've been able to produce videos. They've been able to kind of share this message in a new way that's online and out there, but are starting to ponder, well, but what does it mean when we go back to being in person again? And there's something lovely about being able to pass the peace. Don't get me wrong. There's something lovely about being able to, like, physically hand someone communion. I can't even share what that means to me as a person of faith, to be able to share that with someone tangibly. But to think about ways that we're going to not forget what we learned during this time of being in videos and having to, if you're thinking about the time frame of your sermon and the flow of the whole service, it just reshapes the way we're doing things. And I think the wisdom of people like you, who have kind of been in so many different worlds, will really maybe provide us with some guidance of how to, what the next step is. Because we don't want to, like, be bad at both, because we're trying to both be an in-person worship space and an online space in the same way. And so I think people are looking for guidance about ways that they can do that. My hunch is, here's what I've made up. Let me know what you think about it. is as someone who's done, like, books sometimes and videos sometimes and audio sometimes and art sometimes, and just in-person gatherings that aren't recorded because what's happened is so precious, you shouldn't record it, that I think some of the wisdom we might need for this next step is discerning which genres are appropriate. Like, not everything needs to be recorded. Not everything needs to be a live stream. Not everything needs to be a movie. Like, sometimes it's a book, because you need people to sit with it and digest it and not just consume it in 5 minutes and click away. And my hunch is that we're going to become people who are better at understanding the gifts of each genre, and hopefully have a more diverse ability to share. Like, here's the 3-minute Bible study version of the sermon, and here's the in-person one that's about making you get the shivers. And that's my guess. What do you think it will look like as we're?
I think it's going to be like I think it's going to be a mix of all of that, because there's a famous, a common term in the marketing universe, is that we call it a marketing mix, and it's about being available to people in the form that they digest best, and making sure that that's just all part of the collective mix of what you're offering. For example, the church where I used to serve here in Dallas, is that although the churches are open to like 25 to 50% capacity, and because so many people now are so comfortable doing, a virtual church online, the pastor stands with a huge video wall behind him, and you can see all the people that are online participating in the service. I think that's
amazing.
Thing. There may be just a few people in the audience, but they're still there together. And I think that's awesome. And I could see you having like a big video monitor next to you, and we've got, the whole little gallery of who's participating, and you reformat the service where they are your video audience, your virtual audience is an active part of what's going on. And I think everybody's dynamic is going to shift. It's like we're going to have to shift, because this is like our new reality now, and that we get to embrace technology. I know the church has been afraid of technology, and we've made a lot of great strides, but we get to embrace technology and, in video and, particularly live video. So I'm excited about where it's going. But as you said, there's nothing like, being in fellowship together. We need that, And to me, I think that's another one of those benefits that's coming out of, this whole pandemic, is that we are hungry for some human attention because we've gotten so impersonal through social media and everything. And I can just see, I can't wait to hug somebody again. I don't know about you, but I think we're going to appreciate each other in the physical presence more.
Yeah, part of the chaplaincy work that I do with first responders is I go to scenes where there have been a tragic death, and I care for people on their worst day in a grief moment. So I will confess to you as another pastor that I have hugged more people than I should have, but knowing that sacred work for me was worth it in a special way, and was as safe as possible, even if it wasn't the best practice. Something about being in those really deep to the ground moments of grief and death that just become kind of sacred spaces that sometimes we tread into, even if there's no true preparation for dwelling in those spaces. But I'm with you. That's the part I look the most forward to, is being able to hug folk and find whatever. Like, I have a hunch though that like passing the peace is going to change, because now people might perhaps have a language for, right? Like, because I've longed for this, because there's a lot of folk who have wanted to shake my hand out of respect because I am the pastor, but I can feel when I'm shaking it that their arthritis is in pain.
Right.
They're doing a thing that is causing them pain, though if I didn't shake their hand, they would also be in pain. And so I'm hoping that we also come out of this with a language for honoring our bodies that is new, because we've had to like navigate who wants to bump arms and who wants to shake hands, right? Like, it's a whole new way of trying to just be okay with it. It's awkward that we have different needs about how we're gonna communicate during this time of touches.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, Megan, you've done a great job. I'm like excited to come to San Francisco and visit your church. Like, I want to be there. I really do want to come. I'm planning to come.
Yes. Well, I'm with you. And
I want my communion wafer. I want my
bread. We got to rip the bread.
Okay. I want my bread, and I don't
want Jesus stuck between anyone's teeth.
Well, this is true.
That's my personal theology on that. It's fine, but yeah. No, but I'm into it. I hope we end up in the same stages sometime soon. I hope we end up in more of these conversations.
And if not, we'll create our own. We'll take this. Oh, there we go.
I'm excited to join you on Clubhouse and in some of those conversations as well. And I honestly, if there are ways that I can support what you're up to, I am such a big fan of what you're doing and all of the intersectional places that you have the bravery to walk in whatever way you walk them, that I'm stoked to be your cheerleader, if that makes sense.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And I'm already your cheerleader. So
yay!
Chance to share a stage once already. And it's like, she's my new best friend. She just don't know it yet.
That's right. Well, that's how I felt. So I was glad it was mutual. And I'm super grateful that you've shared time and space with us here. And I know that, especially with all of the ways that your part of the world is having a difficult time, it means even more to me to know that you traversed the limits of electricity to be in this space with me. So I'm super grateful.
Because electricity or no electricity, as we would say in a Pentecostal church, we got power.
Yes. Yes. That was worth the wait. I hope a lot of people watch all the way to that moment, just because that's where it's at, right? And I'm so grateful to be in your pastoral kinship, and so I hope to be able to have many more of these conversations.
Fantastic. And I can't wait to meet those kiddos of yours. So
yes.
I'm glad as well. So can I tell you one funny story about that?
Yes.
Because you were talking about, the diversity of worship and stuff. And I remember when I was new to evangelical / Pentecostal worship, because it's like, even being Black, I got kind of tired of just the loud praise and worship. And I had gotten a little jaded. It's like, it doesn't take all of that. And I remember sitting in service, I'm just watching people running and jumping. It's like, it doesn't take all of that. And I don't know what happened to me. And I think that was God's way of saying, see, you judge, and I'm going to put you in that situation. All I know is I remember coming to myself and I was running through the church building. It's like, what is happening? And it's like, oh my Lord. I said, I'm running. I cannot believe I am running in this church. Oh my God, what is happening? And it's like, I left my son. My son is sitting back there. And I look behind and it's my son right there behind me. Right? But let's do it, Daddy.
That is the best. I love that whatever it was that was your restraint nozzle got broken that day, because you got to have a moment where you're like, ooh, I think I had too much joy maybe there for a second, or I let it all out. And it's just such a lovely moment when you go where you think is too far and you find God there too, and you find people didn't judge you as much, maybe, or maybe they did, I don't know, but that you like live through those moments, and it makes it possible to like figure out what the next level of a career is, or the next level of church life, or the next level of, you know, art, to be able to know that you can punch through that level of your own shame line, maybe your own line of wondering what is too much. And I love that you weren't consciously going through it, that you like woke up already on the other side, right? Vomited out of a whale, perhaps.
So now my praise is exuberant.
Yes, I love it. I think that's fantastic. And I love this idea too, that like it can be too much sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that you can, I have a hunch there's probably not a lot of places where you can admit when it's too much. In those spaces. And so it's I think it's kind of a wonderful, beautiful thing to you're a full human being with a full range of experience, and you even surprise yourself. How great is that?
Absolutely. God
right?
is
Well, that's maybe where I'll encourage us to be two faithful people, inspired by God, to do more than we think is appropriate, when God is shoving us in any given direction. And I know that the Holy Spirit's been buzzing in your ear to always add more, and to have more realms of God bursting forth from you, and from all that you're putting out into the world. And may the moments that it feels like too much be the greatest and most proudest moments when you look at them in retrospect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I love you lots. Maybe let's end our public conversation now, but with a promise to come back and do it again sometime soon.
Sure.
All
Thanks
right.
for having me. This has been beautiful.
Yes, I couldn't love you more, but I'm gonna work on it.